Guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I decided to bring this video where I'm going to go over the basics of MERN, which is a tech stack very common in the web development world. In about 60 minutes, I'll try to keep it short, but it is a pretty big topic, and I really just wanted to make this beginner video for those who are interested in learning the tech stack. So I'll go over how to set up the MongoDB cluster, how to set up the MongoDB database in your computer, also how to create the backend, and we're going to finalize everything by creating a React app that will allow you to communicate with your backend. So with that in mind, before we get into the video, if you guys could leave a like and subscribe, I would massively appreciate it because it will help push my videos to more people and it will just help support the channel. We just hit 30K, which I'm really happy about. So I really wanted to thank you guys because of that. So with that in mind, let's get into the tutorial. Okay everyone, so the first thing we have to do is set up our MongoDB database. And the reason for that is because MERN uses MongoDB as the database management system. And in order to get it to work for us, we need to create an instance of our database in the cloud. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to be using the Atlas service provided by MongoDB. And I'm going to leave a link for it in the description. You just go into the website, create an account. It's completely free. You just sign in, create an account with your email or whatever. So when you create your account and you go into the website, you'll see that you'll find yourself in this page over here probably. It's just a page showing all the projects that you currently have set up in your MongoDB Atlas account. And currently I have a couple, but these are old projects, and if you'll probably have none if this is your first time using it. So what we want to do is we need to create a new project. So I'll click on the new project button and I'll give it a name. In our case, let's call it MERN in 60 minutes. Obviously, this is a horrible name, but just put whatever you want to put, and you can add other members to it if you're doing a project in a group, but I'll just keep it like this, which will be fine. So we'll click on create project and it will start creating the project for us, which is good. And one thing in mind is that when you create a project, you'll see that it'll ask us to build a database, right? Because our project is empty, it doesn't have any databases inside of it. You can only create one database inside of a project, which is free. So if you have a project, you can only have one cluster, which is free. So keep that in mind when creating your MongoDB database. So I'm going to click on build a database. And you should see all of these options over here. The one that we're going to choose is the shared one. For obvious reasons, we want to keep it free, especially if we're just trying to learn and explore the MongoDB cloud environment, as they say over here. If you're actually building something that will be used by a lot of people, choosing the dedicated one or the serverless option are very good because you'll have faster speed and just better control over your database. So when we create this one over here, we'll click on create and it will ask us some information. The first information it'll ask us, or the first thing we can change, is a cloud provider. It doesn't really matter at all, especially because all of those, like Google Cloud, AWS and Azure are all great options. I'm going to choose AWS because I'm kind of biased since I really like the Amazon cloud provider. So if you're interested in choosing one of those, just choose. I'm going to leave it as AWS. Then we can choose a place, and it doesn't really matter at all, especially since it is just a beginner's project. I'm going to choose the Oregon one because I'm closer to it, but choose somewhere near you and it should be fine. Then what we do is there's a cluster tier. We're going to choose the free one, which is the M0 sandbox. And again, if you are creating, you can only have one of those per project. So you can create multiple clusters, but you can only have one of them, which is an M0, and it can only handle at max 100 databases inside of it, and or 500 collections and 500 connections. That won't be a problem at all, especially since this is a beginner's tutorial. Then all of this should be fine. You can give it a name. I'm just going to call it cluster 0. I don't really care, but you can put whatever name you want. You can't change, so it is important to account that. Just put a name that makes sense for you, and it should be fine. Then what we do is we click create cluster. And after it's been created, you'll see it will say your cluster is being created. and it takes 1 to 3 minutes to actually be made, right? To actually work. Now, what we do now is we actually start by writing and creating our project in VS Code. So I have VS Code opened here, and I created a project or a folder called MERN tutorial. I would just recommend creating a folder and opening VS Code inside of that folder. And inside of here, initially what we want to do is we want to create 2 different folders. And the reason why we want to create 2 different folders is because we want to separate our front-end from our backend. So this is a MERN tutorial. So the front-end will handle all the React stuff, and the backend will handle all of the like the NodeJS, Express, and MongoDB stuff. So for now, we'll just create the server and the client, which is the front end. So we'll have both of these folders in our project. The server one is where we want to start. So how we add stuff to and actually create stuff inside of 2 different folders is currently we have 2 folders. So I need to go inside of the server folder by going into my terminal and writing cd, which is change directory, and then in the name of the folder, which is server. Then I press enter, and now I'm inside of the server folder. And what I want to do is I want to initialize an Express server or an Express application inside of this folder. So to initialize an Express application, I just write npm, then init, like this, and then I just press -y. And what this will do is it will just create a package.json file in my application, and with everything kind of already set up for us, as you can see over here. And this is the initial thing that we have to do to create our project. Now what we do is we start by installing the different dependencies and the packages that we want in our application. So the first thing that I want is I want to install Express, which is the framework we're going to use to build our API. Then I'm going to install Mongoose. And what is Mongoose? Basically, MongoDB is a database, right? And we're using it for our project. So we'll have a MongoDB database. But in order to communicate to that database in Express or using Node.js, we can use this library called Mongoose, which is very famous because it allows us to make database queries and database actions or statements very easily. So Mongoose just allows us to communicate with our database in a very easy manner. Then what we want to also install is Course, which is a dependency that is crucial for us to make a connection between our React app and our backend. And then finally, I want to install NodeMon, which will allow us to develop faster. And I'll explain to you guys what exactly it does in a second. So when I press enter, it should start installing everything. And make sure that you're installing it inside of the server directory, because I don't want to install it in the client one or outside. I want to install it inside of here. So as you can see, it finished installing everything, and we can actually start by creating our first file. So I'm just going to come here to the server file folder and create a new file called index.js, and this will be the entry point of our API. It will be the file which we use to start our API, and here is where we're going to write all of the API setup and our database setup information. So I'm gonna start by just importing the Express library that we just installed by creating a variable called Express and setting it equal to require then Express, like this. Then what I want to do is I want to create a variable called app, and this app variable will represent all of the Express stuff that we get from the library. So we'll use this to do a lot of stuff, including applying middlewares, telling our API to start, creating routes, whatever we want. And if you're not familiar with those, don't worry, we'll go over them. So I'll just need to create this app variable over here. And if I want to tell my API to start, all I have to do is I just have to say app.listen. And then I put a port over here, so a port number. Since we're going to be running this locally, I'm going to put the port number 3001 because React will run on the port 3000. So we'll just keep this as 3001 and it should be fine. Then I want to put a callback function over here, which will just run when your server starts running. So if your server actually runs and everything is set up correctly, it should run this function, which means I'll just console log something saying like server runs perfectly. I don't know, whatever you want. I actually never use perfectly, but I'll just say the server runs. And this should give us an indication that the server is running. Now we can test it out by opening our terminal over here and just running node, then the name of the file that we created, which is index.js. And you'll see that it says server runs perfectly. And the server will continue running until we kill the terminal. You see, I can't write anything else, like I can't write any commands. The server is running, and if I want to stop it, I need to put on my keyboard Control-C, and we'll kill the terminal. Now, an issue is, we want to be able to, whenever we make any changes to our server, restart the server so that it shows the changes, right? And in order to do that, we can use the library that we installed called NodeJS to make that work. The thing is, the way we can do that is we come here to the scripts inside of the package.json, and inside of here we add a new script called start. And we just write NodeJS index.js, and what this should do is, whenever we run npm start, it should start NodeJS, which whenever we make any changes to our files, it will restart the server and making our development environment a lot easier. You'll see that if I write npm start now, it's going to run NodeJS, our server is running perfectly, and if I save the file, it will restart the server, which means that I can just make some changes without having to kill the terminal and run node index.js again. If you're not familiar with NodeJS, it is widely used, and I wouldn't worry at all about this, but it's just a nice thing to have while you're developing. Now we can start setting up our MongoDB connection. And the way we do this is very, very simple. We need to come over here, and at the top, we need to import mongoose from the mongoose library. So we're going to say const mongoose equals to require mongoose. Then what we do is we just say mongoose dot connect like this. And the mongoose.connect, it takes in a string over here, which basically represents the connection to the cluster that we just created over here. If it doesn't make sense, I'll explain to you guys in a second. Basically what we do is, this is our database, it was created. Remember that in the beginning it was still creating. Well, it's been 3 minutes, so it created over here. So I'll click on it, and I'll click connect. And when you click connect, it will ask us a bunch of information to allow us to connect securely. And one thing that we can do is we need to click add current IP address, because it will only allow us to have connection to this database if we are currently in this IP address. So I'll just click add IP address, and it says an IP address has been added to your IP access list, which is perfect. Then we need to create a user for our database. Why do we need to create a user? Well, because we don't want people who shouldn't have access to the database in the backend or when they're developing having access to the database. So we can create a user over here, and I'll just call it user123, and the password will be password. I'll just show you guys. I'll write password 123. Well, make this a little bit more secure. Obviously, I'll delete this right after I finish recording this video, just so you guys know. So I just created these values for simplicity reasons, but put better values so that your database is more secure. Then we're gonna click on create database user, and damn, it says the password is too weak. Okay, I'll say something like password 123. I don't know, tech for PedroTech. And we'll click on create database user. Then it will say you'll need your MongoDB user's credentials in the next step. We'll then click on choose a new connection method. And what we want right now is we want to click on connect using MongoDB Compass. Now, what exactly does this mean? Well, obviously we want to connect to our database in our application over here, and this is just for us to be able to write code that will be able to alter the values in the database. But we want to have a way to actually see the data in the database in our computer, and the way we do this is by using this software called MongoDB Compass. I'm going to leave the link to the website so you can download in the description, but it's a very simple software that is created by MongoDB, so it is very reliable. And what we need to do now is, in order to connect our database inside of the software, we just click on connect using MongoDB Compass. Then I'll say I have MongoDB Compass. Just leave it like this, and you'll see that this is the string that we use. Now, what this string represents is the connection string that we'll both use on the MongoDB Compass and on our mongoose.connect function over here. So we'll just copy it like this, and I'll paste it over here. One change that I need to make is I need to put the password inside of here instead of this password thing over here, because they don't want to put your password. They already put your username, but you need to change this to your password. And my password was password123tech, like this. And when I click connect, you should see that it is connecting, and now we have access to our database that we just created in the cloud, which is amazing. So now what we can do is we can come over here, just put the string again inside of here, and again change this to the name of our password. So I'll put password password123. Then what else? We need to put tech like this. And there is only one difference, which is this over here is connecting to our MongoDB Compass. It is a bit different to connect it to our actual server. So what we do is we come over here, we'll click on close. Then what we do is we click on connect again, and instead of saying connect using MongoDB Compass, we connect to our application. And this is the full string that we want to use. You see it's a bit different, right? It's not completely different, but it is just some minor changes. I want to keep this password somewhere inside of this file so I don't have to rewrite it. Then I'm going to paste the whole string that we just got, and then I'll change this over here to the password that we created, like this, and we just save it. But there's one final thing we need to do. You see that it says my first database over here. The reason is that we created a cluster, and this connects to the cluster, but we still need to create a database for this project. So how do we do that is by coming to our MongoDB Compass and clicking on create database. Then we put a name for this database. In our case over here, I'm gonna call it MERN tutorial, but obviously call it something else. Like if you're making if you're making a social media, put social media database, whatever you want. Like it's just for learning, but put a name for the database and a name for a collection inside of that database. So what are collections? Well, if you're familiar with SQL or any other type of database, a collection is just a table. You can have multiple of them inside of a project. The one that we're going to create is a user collection. So in our project, as an example, we'll be able to create users. So I'll create a table or a collection called users. And then I'll click on create database to create our collection. And now we have this database over here, and with a collection called users, as you can see. The thing we want is we want to basically copy the name MERN tutorial and paste it instead of my first database to tell MongoDB which database we are connecting to. And then finally, this over here should be all good. And now that we have this done, we have a connection to our database. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to create collections and models inside of our project. So we did create a collection called users. So we want to set the fields and values that exist inside of this collection. So the way we do this is we come here to the server and we create a folder called models. And every MongoDB project will probably have a models folder. And inside of it, we basically just create files that represent different collections that we have in our database. So for example, if we have a users collection, we create a users file. So we'll create a users.js, and inside of here, we're going to define the structure of this model. We start by importing mongoose from, we'll say equal to require, and then we require the mongoose library. Then we create something called a schema by saying const users schema, like this, and setting it equal to, actually I'll call it user schema because it makes more sense. And then I'm going to say new mongoose dot schema, like this. And then we'll create an object inside of here that kind of defines all the fields and values that the schema should contain. So for example, in a user, we might want to keep track of their name. So I'll create a name property over here, and we need to give certain information about this field. For example, what is the type of it? Well, the type for a name is a string, so we'll write string. Then is it required or not? Well, I want every user to have a name, so it must be required. I should just skip it like that, and it should be fine. I also want to give an age so that we have the age of the users. So we'll say age, then the type will be, well, age is a number, so the type will be number. And we'll also make this required. So required is equal to true. Now, finally, let's just add one more thing, because I always like to add like some sort of email or something like that. I'm actually gonna add username. So this is just a final field. We'll give a type of string like this, and required will be true as well. So this is our schema. Each user will have a name, an age, and a username, and it looks really good. So this is how you kind of define your schema. You can do this as many times as you want for different schemas throughout your application, and you just follow the same format. And there's other properties you can use as well. I would recommend just going over the documentation, which they list out all the different stuff that you can add to each of your fields. But now what we do is, down here at the bottom, we need to create a model out of this schema. So we create a variable called the user model, and set it equal to mongoose dot model. And this model function will take in two things. First, the name of the collection, or the name of the model, and then the schema that represents that model. The schema will be user schema, the one that we just created. And the name will be users, which is the one that we have over here. So we'll put users. And by the way, we already created the users one, so we'll just replace that one. But if you haven't created one and you're running your application, by doing this, it will automatically create it inside of your database system, so you shouldn't really worry about that. Finally, all we have to do is we just have to come here at the bottom, and we need to export this for outside of this file so that we have access to this model, and we can make changes to our table or our collection throughout our application. So I'm going to say module.exports equals to user model. And that means that now we have access to the user model outside of this file. So I'm going to save this, and we'll actually come here to our index.js. And for simplicity reasons, all of the API requests that I make will exist inside of this file. So to do that, all I have to do is I can write get requests, for example, by writing app.get, or if I want to make a post request, I can write app.post. This is kind of how you can write HTTP requests inside of Express. And there's other ways of doing this. If you want to use routes to separate it throughout your files, you can do that too. But since it's not the focus of the videos, I won't go over that since it's a little bit more complicated. But what we want to do is we want to create two simple requests in this API, just to get you guys going and teach you guys the basics of Express and MongoDB. So what are these requests? Well, we just have a connection to our database, but we don't have any way to request data from the database in the front end, and we don't have any way to add data from the front end to our database. Well, the way we do this is by creating this kind of bridges in the backend, which connects, which when requested in the front end, makes a connection to our database and then sends back information. And these bridges are called API requests or API endpoints. So we'll create some requests over here. And the first one we want to create is the app.get request. And this request is pretty simple. All it does is we put over here some sort of route that determines what it is. So I'm gonna call it get users. Pass in a callback function over here. This is a format of a request in Express. This callback function takes in always two arguments, rec and res. And rec and res basically means request and response. With rec, we can get information that is sent from the frontend, and with REST, we can send information from the backend to the frontend. And you'll get more used to them as you go, but they are extremely important, and we'll be using them in this tutorial. So inside of here, we write all the logic that we want to have for when the frontend makes a request or GET request to the /get users route. And what is exactly the logic that we want? Well, basically over here is where we're going to request data from our database. And in our case, let's just keep it simple. All we want to get is we want to get all the users as a list from our MongoDB collection. So imagine if in this collection over here, it is full of data. Right now it doesn't have anything. We can actually add data if we want to. And if we want to add data manually through MongoDB Compass, all we have to do is we just click on Add Data, then Insert Document. Then you'll see this over here. It automatically adds an ID, a random ID, since each element in the collection will have an ID. Then all we do is we just add the information that we want for each user. For example, a user will have a name, so I'll add a field called name. And this is JSON, so you need to put quotation marks around the fields. So we'll say that the name is Pedro. Then the age is 20 because that's my age. Then finally, let's give a username. I'll call it PedroTech, like this. And we'll just click Insert Data. And you should see that now our database includes one user inside of it, and we didn't actually have to do anything inside of our code. We just manually added it to our database through MongoDB Compass. Now that we have one user, it is good because what we want to do with the GET request is we want to just return back a list of all the users that exist in the table currently. And right now we only have one, so we will only get one back. And what we do is we need to use our model that we created to tell it to find the data that we want. So we need to have access to that model. So over here at the top, I'll say const user model, like this. User model is equal to require, and then we need to get the user model that we created in the models/users file. And then what we do is with this specifically, we can basically just use this function called the find function. So I'll say user model.find, and you'll see that there are many options that you can actually use. You can find by ID, you can find find and delete. You can do many things you want. Technically, what we want is just to use the find function because we want to retrieve all the users. So what you can do with this is if you say user model.find and then just put an empty object, it will basically return back all the documents or all the data inside of the collection. And with that in mind, after it returns back all the data, it will call this callback function over here. And this callback function will return two arguments. The first one is any errors that occur, and the second one is the result from the query, from the request to the database. So we can basically just have the simple syntax format, which just says if there's any errors, then I want to handle those errors. I want to do something related to that, like understand why there was an error making the request. But if there was no error, then I want to return back to the front end the result that we just got back from our database. So how do we send data back to the front end? Well, I mentioned that this res over here is meant for that. So the way we do this is I'm going to say res.json, and this JSON file or this JSON function over here, it is used for transforming this and parsing this into JSON and sending back JSON data to our front end. So I'll say res.json result, and it will send back the results that we got from our table. And in relation to the error, what we can do is we can just say res.json the error, right? Send back the error so that in the front end we can see which error was returned. You're wondering, how do we test this out? Because we just created this endpoint, but the only way to test it out, is it really just creating the whole front end to test out if this request works? Well, no, you can actually test it out inside of your VS Code There's an extension that I use called Thunder Client, and I recommend installing it. It's called Thunder Client. Just install it in your VS Code. I'll leave the link for it in the description if you're interested. And basically, what I can do is I can click on New Request over here. Then I'll put over here HTTP, then 2/ localhost 3001. And the reason why I say localhost 3001 is because this is the link to our API. This is where our API will be running in our computer. And then if I want to make a request to the get users endpoint that we just created, we need to make sure that we're making a get request. So it is a get request, as you can see over here. And we need to make sure that we're making a request to the /get users route. So I'll copy this and put it at the end over here. So we'll be making a request to this. And if everything is working, what should happen is when I make this request over here, it should return back success. And as you can see, it returns back the data from our database, which is amazing. It means everything is working perfectly. If there was any errors, you can see, for example, if I make the request to the wrong endpoint, it will just say that it didn't find any requests with the given route, which is /get. So there was no requests with that endpoint. So I'll just say get users, which is the one that works. And you should see that it keeps returning back the data from the database, which is amazing. Now that we created our get request, let's create our post request, which is a request to add data to our collection, to our database. So to make the post request, we're going to come down here at the bottom and we're going to say app.post. And we're just going to put another route name. For example, we call the get one get users. We're going to call this create users or create user. It makes more sense. Then we'll use the same syntax by using res over here and creating a callback function to this request. Now, in the previous one, we didn't use the rec, but we used the res. In this one, we're going to be using both. The reason why is because I want you to picture this. In the front end, we're going to have some sort of form which the user can put some data in, like their name, their age, and their username. And then I want to receive that data over here so that then I can use that data to insert it inside of our database. Well, how do I get that data from the front end? Well, when you make a request from the front end, you can pass an object, so like an object like this, and the name of that object is called the body. So that body will exist inside of this rec variable over here. So what we do is we assume the front end will send some sort of body object, and we'll call it user. So we'll say user is equal to rec.body. So this over here represents the data that we want to insert in our database, and we will be sending this from the front end. Then what we can do is we can just come over here, and in order to add the data to our model or to our collection, we actually need to create a variable called new user, and set equal to new user model, which is the model that we have. And then over here, we just pass the object that we create, that we want, or the user that we want to add, which is this over here. Now, when we do this, we have to come down here at the bottom, and we need to say that we want to save this new information. Well, to do that, we can only do it by making this an async function, because most of these operations are all going to be async. So I would always recommend making the functions inside of here asynchronous, so that when you come to, for example, adding new data or updating data or deleting data, you can do something like await new user dot save, which is a function that exists in Mongoose. Now, this is a very weird syntax, especially in the beginning, and I do recognize that, but just practice by creating multiple endpoints, multiple routes and requests that in your API, and just know that, remember, to create a new user, you just say a new user model, pass the data that you want to insert into the database, and then say await and save that data. Finally, when everything is done, when we've added, we just want to return back to our front end, because we always need to use the res variable, because we need to send back something in a request. And all we want to send back is the new user that we created. And the reason for that is because we won't be using this data, but we just send it back so that we know we're actually getting the correct information in our backend. So now that we have this endpoint done, let's test it out similar to what we did here in this one that we created, the get one. So in order to test out a post request, we changed this to post, and we also changed this to create user because that's the name that we gave. So create user. Then what we need to do is we need to come over here into our body. And as I mentioned, you need to pass a body from the front end. So since we're simulating a request, we pass it over here as JSON like this. We just add some sort of JSON, and I'll zoom out a bit just so you guys can get a better view of this. But basically, we just need to pass the data in the JSON format by giving it a name. So let's call this person JSON. Then the age, let's make JSON 35. Then the username, and the username will be JSON123. Well, this is fine. This is the body. So when we say rect.body over here, we should be getting this object over here. Now there's an issue. This is JSON, right? And we want to have it as an object. Well, so we need to parse the JSON, but we don't need to do that manually because Express allows you to do that by just coming over here and saying app, like over here, and saying app.use express.json. If you don't do this, then any requests that involve the body will give you an error. So you need to do this or else it won't work. So now that we have that done, we can actually test out this request by clicking send over here. And you see that the status was okay, which means it might have worked. And we get back the data that we sent. This isn't a confirmation that the data is in our database. To see if it is in a database, we just come to the MongoDB Compass, we refresh this, and you should see that JSON now is in our database, which means that it is working. We added a new user directly from our API. Now, this is basically it for our backend because we created our two endpoints over here, and we just need to find a way to connect them in our frontend using React. Now, the React part will go a little bit faster because I won't be worrying about like appearance or anything. Like, I don't care how my React app looks. All I care about is being able to make requests to this API using React. So in order to do that, we need to before come over here and import something called course from the course library. So require course. And we installed this in the beginning. If you remember, this is basically going to allow us to connect this API with our React frontend without giving us any errors. That's all you have to worry about, course, in the beginning. Just know that you need to do this, or else it will definitely give you errors. So just say app.use course and import the library, and this should fix all the errors that would emerge if you didn't do that. So this is basically it for the backend. So we can just close this and come to our client folder and start developing our frontend. Okay, so at this point, I just want to point out that it's more than 60 minutes. So I definitely didn't. So at this point, I just realized it is currently more than 60 minutes. So I realized that I wasn't able to teach you guys in 60 minutes, and it's fine. I'll just say that whichever like time it takes for me to finish this will be the length of the video. But with that in mind, let's start working on our React part of our application. So in order to do that, what we want to do is we want to open up our terminal and open up a new tab in our terminal. And the reason we do this is because one tab will be running our server and the other tab will be running our React server. So there's two different servers, the front end and the back end. So for the front end, what we want to do is we now are in our like outside directory. We want to change our directory to go inside of the client folder. So cd client, and you can see that now we're inside of our client folder. And in order to run a React app inside of here, we need to do something similar to what we did with the server, but we need to run the command npx create React app. So it's the command that creates a React application, a boilerplate application for that handles React, and it's going to generate the files for us. So with the React part of the application, it's going to be pretty simple in the sense that we won't be installing anything crazy like we were with our NodeJS and Express part of our application. It's all going to be simple React. The only thing we will be installing is a package called Axios, and I'll just open up my terminal here. It's finishing installing. I'll be back in a second when it finishes. Okay, just finished. So I'll just install by running npm install Axios. And Axios is a library that allows you to basically allows you to make API requests very simply without having to use the fetch API that exists inside of JavaScript naturally. So it's a library that allows you to make API requests in a very simple manner. So now that it is installed, what we want to run is we want to run npm start. And what this should do is it should run our React app so that in this browser over here, it should open up our localhost 3000 and it should open up our application and we should see a simple page running this. So this is just what it comes with when you run create React app. But what we want to do is we want to just come to our source folder and delete a couple files. We want to delete the setup tests, the logo, the index.css, and the app.test.js because we won't be dealing with them, especially in the beginning. I'll move them to trash, then I'll come to the index.js and I'll delete this import statement because we just deleted the index.css, so there's no more file to import. And then we're going to come here to our app.js and I want to start from the beginning, so I'll delete everything inside of here, including this logo import statement, and it should be fine. We should just see now, if I refresh my page over here, a simple web page that is empty, which is perfect, and we can start developing our frontend. So what exactly do we want to do with the frontend? Well, I'm not going to be writing any CSS because there's no reason for it. It's just going to make this video unnecessarily long, and it's not the point of the video. The point of the video is setting up a MERN application. So in order to do that, we want to test out our two API endpoints that we created, which were the endpoint for getting a list of users and the endpoint for creating a new user. Well, how will we do that? Well, the first thing I want to do is test the endpoint for getting a list of users. And in order to make this work, I'll just basically, I just want to display, I want to have a div over here. I'll even give it a class name just so we can get an idea of like a structure of the website. But this div will basically be the users display. And inside of here, we're going to display each user and their information in a list manner, right? So how exactly would we make this work? Well, to make this work, we need to make an API request to our backend, and then we need to store that data inside of a state. So I'm going to create a state by coming over here and say import from React, and I want to import a hook called the useState hook. If you're not familiar with the useState hook, I have a video where I go over all the hooks that exist in React. Some of them will be more complicated, some of them will be more simple, but the useState hook is extremely important and it is fundamental that you know before trying to work with any full stack application, so I would recommend checking that out. And what we do with the useState hook is we're going to come over here and we're going to create a state which is going to be a list. So its initial value will be an empty array, and this list will be just called list of users. And then we're going to create a function that is used to alter this state. So it's going to be set, then list of users. And what we need now is we need a way to, when someone enters the website, when someone refreshes the page or goes to this URL, we want to automatically make an API call to our backend and populate this state with the information, right? Because for example, if initially this list was just like, just a list with a single user, we can give it an ID of one, name of Pedro, age of 20, and I think the last one was username, and the username will be, I don't know, Pedro123. Then what happens is now our state contains only one user. And what we want to do with this is inside of this div, we want to grab the state and map through each value of this list. Now the map function will basically run through each element of the list And in React, what we can do with this is we can basically create a function that returns some HTML for every element of the list. So technically, we can just say that each element in the list will be called a user, and I want to return here some sort of div for each user, which will contain the information about the user. We can even divide those informations by using some header tags. So I'll say that for the name, for example, we'll just say name is equal to, and we can directly add JavaScript inside of here. So I can just say user.name. And then for the age, I can do the same thing by saying user.age. And I'll just pass age over here. And we can do the same thing for username. Now, this is a very common syntax in React. What happens is it will just look through the list for each user that currently exists in the list. It's going to create a new div with all this information and populate these values with the correct value for each element. Right now, we only have one user because we just pre-populated, as an example, a fake user. And if we save this, you should see that it actually works. It is displaying the information. But what we really want to do is, instead of pre-populating this, we want this to be empty. And we want to make the API call as we refresh this page or as we go into the website. And to do that, we need another hook called the useRef hook. Or not the useRef, the useEffect hook. Sorry about that. And down here, the useEffect hook is basically just a function that is going to run immediately when the website is loaded. So it's the first thing it's going to run when the website is loaded. It's going to be whatever we put inside of this function. So the syntax is very simple. We just say useEffect, then we create a function inside of here. And at the end over here, we just pass a list, an empty array. And if you're not familiar with the syntax, again, I recommend watching that video where I go over all the hooks because I go over what this is. But basically, all you need to know is that inside of this useEffect, I'm going to make an API call to my backend. And here's where Axios come into place, because I'm going to import Axios from the Axios library. And Axios has a very nice syntax where if I want to make a GET request, for example, all I have to do is I just have to say axios.get, then put the URL to my API or to the endpoint, which we know the URL because we've been working with it. If I go to Thunder Client, which we've been using, and I just copy this URL over here, but instead of being create user, we want to get the get users endpoint. If I just copy this, I can just paste it over here, and this is the endpoint for our API. It's where it's running. This is like this because our API is running locally. But if it's running on a website, this would be the URL to the website, right, to the server. And get users is just the endpoint that we want to make our get request. And what we can do now is, after this API request is done, we want to get the data. So this will return the promise, and I can just say .then, and inside of here, I'll get the data, the response from this API request. So if you recall, in our backend, we keep saying for every request, we say response.json, right? So this response is going to send data, and we're going to catch that data. We're going to get that data in this response variable over here. So whatever we send from the backend, we're going to receive in this variable over here. And to access the data, we just have to say something like response.data. This is how we access the data from the API request. So technically, we're going to get back the list of users. So what we can do is we can set a list of users equal to the response.data. So that now, when we make this API request, it's going to set the list of users to whatever we get from this API request. I'm going to save this right here, and we will see if it is actually working. And we can check to see if this is working by coming here to our website and refreshing the page. And if it's working, you can see that our data is being displayed perfectly in our screen. Now, obviously, it is super ugly, and technically we only have two pieces of data. We only have 2 users in our database, but it's fine. I wanted to give you the tools to make this work, but you guys can make it look better on your own, because the hard part about this is not making it look good. It is actually setting up everything so that it is working in the backend and in the front end, so that you have a good full stack application. Now, this is the basics of making a GET request. But how would we make a POST request? Because we want to send data from our frontend to our backend to create a new user. How can we do that? Well, what I want to do is I'm going to create a div over here straight up, and what I need to do is I need to create some inputs that we're going to be using in the website to for the user to input some data and send it as a form, right? So let's create the inputs. I'll create an input over here, and this input will be of type text. And what I plan to do with this input is this one would be for the name. So let's put a placeholder called name. And I'll create 2 more inputs for the age and the username. So the age will be of type number, and we'll say age. And then the other will be of type text, and we'll say username. Now we should see the 3 inputs appearing here in our screen. The user can input information so that we can send it to the backend. But currently it's not doing anything. We do have to add some functionalities to it. But before that, we need to add a button, which when you click on it, it will actually send the data. So we're gonna say create user, and this will be the button that we click to make the API request to send the data. Well, what we need to do is we need to create some sort of function up here that will be called when we click on that button. So I'm gonna call this function create user. And over here, we're gonna have some sort of Axios request, some Axios post request that is made when the button is clicked. So I'll just say on click on this button. When this button is clicked, I wanna call the create user function. But the thing is, we're just gonna set up the basics of this Axios request. We're gonna say Axios.post because it's a post request. Then we're gonna put the URL for our post request, which is this one over here. But instead of being get users, it's gonna be create user, which is how we called it in the backend. Then we're gonna say .then if there's any response, which in our case we really don't care about the response, right? Because it's just a post request. We're just creating and adding some users to the database. We'll just alert a message over here saying success, right? I'll just say like user created. And what will happen is we'll add the user to the database. And then if it works out, we'll just alert a message saying user created. The reason why we're not touching on the response is because we don't care about the response when we create a user, because it doesn't really matter. We do care about the response because we're on the get request because we're sending data back. But with the create user, we really don't care about the data that we're getting back. We only care about the data that we're sending to the backend. Now there's a difference. If you recall, for the post request, we send some data to the backend through an object called the body, right? Over here, I mentioned that in the post request, we need to assume that the person making the request will send the user information, an object including the name, the age, and the username, through the body. Well, how do we do this in the front end? Well, to do that, all we have to do is we just have to pass an object over here, which is going to represent that object for the body. So we need to pass some sort of object that is going to include the name, or some sort of name value, some sort of age value, and some sort of username value. Well, currently we are not getting that information from those inputs. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to get whatever the user wrote in this input and put it over here so that we send that information through the request. So the way we do this is we create some states that are going to hold that information. So I'm going to create a state for each of those inputs. So name and set name, and this will be a string like this. Then I'll create one for the username and one for the age. So age and set age, and age is a number, so I'll start out as 0, and then username and set username like this, and then it will also be a string. Now what we do with the states is when there's any changes to the input, we want to detect that. So whenever there's any change, so on change, whenever there's any change or someone write anything in the input, we can call a function like this, and this function we can grab the value of the input. So we can get whatever currently exists inside of the input by accessing this thing called an event. And we can just set the state, so this is the name input. We can set the state name to be equal to whatever value exists inside of the input by saying event.target.value. This is a very common thing you do in React to get the data from an input. So we're going to do the exact same thing for the other inputs, but instead of being set name, it will be set age, because this is the age input, so set age. And we'll do the same thing for the username as well by coming over here and just pasting it as well and changing this to set username like this. Now when we save this, it should be fine. We should be populating this states with whatever values the input are, like whatever values we are writing on the input over here. So what we just need to do now is we just need to pass those states over here. So name, we're going to pass the name state, age will pass the age state, and username will pass the username state. Now a tip I'll give you guys is whenever you have an object that the key is equal to a variable with the same name, so like the key is name and the name of the state or the variable is name, we don't need to say name is equal to name. We can just say name like this, and we'll do the same for age, the same for username. This is just a little thing that you can do whenever you're working with objects like this. In my opinion, it makes it look better, but basically this means it is working. Now we need to test it out. How do we test it out? Well, we'll come over here, we'll refresh our page. Let's try to create a new user. Currently we just have Jason and Pedro. I'm gonna add to our thing someone called Paulo of age 21, and username will be orbless, whatever that means. Then we're gonna click create user, and we saw that we have user created. Now this means that our API request worked. So it means that we sent data to the backend and we made a request for the backend. Now, did it actually add the user to the database? Well, to check that out, let's just refresh the page and make a GET request again. If we make a GET request again, now it includes Paulo, which is amazing. Now you might be questioning, well, whenever you create a new user, do you always have to refresh the page? Well, it depends. It depends, because if you want to query the data, if you want to get the accurate data that is in the backend every time you click on a button, you technically need to make a GET request every time to refresh the data in your page. But there's a little workaround for this, which is we can alter the list of users state directly. So over here, after we add the user, instead of just saying user created, we can say set list of users, and we want to add the new user that we're trying to create to the end of this list. So we'll just say we want to set the list of users to be whatever existed in the previous list of users. So the syntax just means I want to set this equal to an array with everything inside of list of users plus whatever I put over here. And what I want to put over here is the object or the user with the name equal to name, or just this body that we passed as the request. So just the user that we just created, right? I'll just copy this and paste it over here. And when we save this, you should see that when I add a new user, so I'm gonna add a user called, and I'll just zoom in so you guys can see it better. If I add a user called Colin of age 56, username Colin123, and click create user, the Colin user was now added to our thing. And we can create multiple users. I'm going to create someone called Leo of age 1980, and I'll call this person Leozalo and click on create user, and the user is over here as well. And if I refresh the page, the users will continue here because they were also added to our MongoDB database. Let me refresh it so you can see all the data exists inside of here. Now, this is basically it. I really just wanted to go over the basics of creating your first MERN application, so your first full stack MERN application. If you're interested in seeing everything related to MERN, I do have a series where I go over update requests, delete requests, everything you might want to know. It's 4 videos just going over everything. So I'll probably link that down in the description or just add a card over here. So that's basically it. I really appreciate you guys watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe because I post 2 times a week, and I would massively appreciate if you guys could support the channel. Comment down below any questions you guys have because I'll be answering as much as I can to try to help you guys out. And yeah, that's basically it. Really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.